I never imagined a quiet summer evening on my lakeside property would turn into a full-blown standoff with the HOA and their queen bee, Karen. Last night, I had stocked my lake with a few harmless nurse sharks for a wildlife project totally legal and supervised. But today, HOA Karen let her kids swim there, and when I calmly told her to keep them out, she dialed 911 like I was some criminal. What happened next? Well, let's just say the lake and the truth had my back. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I've always been a man who values peace and quiet. My property sits on about 12 acres, with a lake I consider my sanctuary. I bought this place after retiring early from my career as a wildlife consultant. For years, I've been turning that lake into a small but thriving ecosystem. It's my personal slice of paradise where I can sit on the old wooden dock, sip my black coffee, and listen to the wind moving through the trees without a soul around to bother me. Last week, I had an idea for a unique project, one I've been planning for months. I wanted to stock the lake with nurse sharks for a wildlife observation study. Now, before you raise an eyebrow, let me be clear. Nurse sharks are docile creatures, more curious than dangerous. They are bottom dwellers, and they rarely bother anyone, as long as you respect their space. I've done this kind of work before, in controlled environments, and I had every permit lined up, every safety measure ready. I spent hours the night before setting everything up. With the help of two trusted friends, both marine biologists, we transferred a handful of small nurse sharks into the lake. These weren't big predators. They were no more than 4 feet long, each carefully transported in aerated tanks. We worked well past midnight, making sure they were healthy and adjusting smoothly. By 2 a.m., we were standing there under the moonlight, watching their silhouettes glide through the water. It was peaceful, almost magical. I thought I'd have at least a few quiet days to monitor their behavior before anyone noticed. But I underestimated one thing, Karen. If you've ever had the pleasure of dealing with an HOA Karen, you know exactly the type I'm talking about. She's the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, though no one can remember actually electing her. She has this talent for popping up out of nowhere whenever she senses something isn't going exactly the way she thinks it should. The morning after we stocked the sharks, I was out by the dock with my notebook, jotting down some observations. The lake was calm, the surface glimmering under the morning sun. That's when I heard the sound. I dread the sharp, nasal tone of Karen yelling at her kids. "Tyler, don't forget your floaties, Mia. Stop running." I turned around, and sure enough, there she was, marching toward the lake with her 2 kids in tow. They were carrying beach towels, inflatables, and buckets like they were about to set up for an entire afternoon of swimming. I could already feel my jaw tightening. "Morning, Karen," I said, trying to sound civil. She barely looked at me. "Morning," she replied, with that condescending tone that could curdle milk. "We're just here to let the kids swim." "I hope you don't mind." "I do mind. This lake isn't community property. It's on my land, fully deeded to me. But Karen has always acted like anything within a mile of her house belongs to the HOA, including my shoreline." "Actually, Karen," I said, standing up, "the lake isn't open for swimming right now. I'm working on a wildlife project, and it's not safe for anyone to be in the water." She stopped mid-step, hands on her hips, squinting at me like I just told her the sky was green. "Not safe? What on earth are you talking about? This is just a lake. Kids have been swimming in it for years." "That's not true," I replied calmly. "Your kids have been swimming in it without asking. But this is private property. Karen, I've told you before you need my permission to be here." Karen smirked. "Oh, come on. Don't be so uptight. It's just water. What's the big deal?" I sighed. I knew explaining about the nurse sharks would cause a scene, but I also knew I couldn't risk her kids jumping in. "Karen, last night I introduced some aquatic species for research purposes. It's not dangerous if you stay out of the water, but I strongly recommend no one swims here right now." Her face twisted into that sarcastic grin I hate. "Are you telling me you put animals in there like fish? You're acting like this is some high-security lab or something. You don't know nature. You know." I clenched my notebook. I could feel my patience thinning. "Karen," I said, looking her square in the eye, I do own this lake. And if you step foot in there without my permission, you're trespassing. I don't want anyone swimming here until I finish my work." "Understood." She crossed her arms, glaring at me like a teenager told to do her homework. "We'll see about that," she muttered. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Not with Karen. The thing about Karen is that she thrives on confrontation. Most folks in our neighborhood have learned to nod, smile, and let her run her mouth just to avoid the headache. But I'm not most folks. I worked too hard for this land, paid every penny from my own pocket, and I'm not about to let anyone treat it like a public pool. Later that afternoon, I was fixing a loose plank on the dock when I heard the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming. I turned around and nearly dropped my hammer. Karen was back, and this time she brought her reinforcements. 3 SUVs were parked along the gravel road leading to my property. Out stepped Karen, her 2 kids, and 2 other women I recognized from the HOA meetings, each with their own children. They were armed with coolers, lawn chairs, and enough beach gear to set up a summer camp. I muttered under my breath, "You've got to be kidding me." Karen strutted down the path like she owned the place, sunglasses perched on her head, phone in one hand, water bottle in the other. Her kids were already kicking off their shoes, running toward the water. "Karen, I thought I was clear this morning." I called out, setting down my hammer and walking toward them. She didn't even slow down. "Oh, we heard you," she said with a fake smile. "But we're not here to cause trouble. We're just here for a quick swim. It's 95 degrees today. For crying out loud. The kids need to cool off." "Not happening," I said firmly. "The lake is off limits. I don't care how hot it is, you need to leave." One of the other women, a tall brunette named Susan, chimed in. "Come on, Luke, don't be that guy. It's just water. We've always thought this lake was part of the community. Nobody's ever made a fuss before." I pointed toward the big oak tree where my property line sign stood clear as day. "This lake is on my property, Susan. Always has been. There's nothing community about it. And right now, it's not safe for swimming." Karen smirked and muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Safe for swimming? What? Did you put piranhas in there or something?" I took a deep breath. "No. But I did introduce some aquatic wildlife for a research project. It's temporary, but I don't want anyone in the water while I'm monitoring it." That set Karen off. She turned to her little audience like she was leading a protest. "See, this is exactly what I was talking about at the last HOA meeting. Luke thinks he can just do whatever he wants with our lake. It's ridiculous." "Our lake," I repeated, my voice rising just a notch. "Karen, this isn't your HOA pond. I own this land, every inch of it. I pay the taxes, the maintenance, the whole 9 yards. You and your friends don't have any right to barge in here." Karen crossed her arms, smirking like she'd just won an argument. "We'll see what the HOA has to say about that." I could feel my patience wearing thin, Machine. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over my property. "Karen, you can call them. You can hold a meeting. You can write it in skywriting if you want. It won't change the fact that this lake is mine." Susan's son, maybe 8 years old, started wading into the shallows with his floaties. I stepped forward quickly. "Hey, out of the water now," I barked. The boy froze, startled, and Susan shot me a glare. "Luke, you're scaring the kids," she snapped. "They need to be scared," I said bluntly. "There are creatures in that water that could bite if provoked." "I'm not going to have anyone hurt because you don't listen." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now it's dangerous. That's all I need to hear. I'm calling 911. You can explain to the cops why you've turned a peaceful lake into some shark tank." I almost laughed, but the sight of her actually dialing the number made me realize she wasn't bluffing. "Karen, don't be stupid," I said, holding up my hand. "There's nothing illegal about what I'm doing here. You're trespassing, and if you call the cops, you're only going to embarrass yourself." "Embarrass myself," she said, tilting her head. "You'll be the one explaining to the police why you've got sharks swimming where kids used to play." She pressed the call button. Karen's voice carried across the lake as she spoke to the 911 operator, loud enough for everyone to hear. She was putting on a show, describing me like I was some lunatic with a backyard death trap. "Yes, officer, this man has sharks in his lake. Actual sharks. And there are children here. I'm afraid for their safety." She paused, nodding as if the operator could see her. "Yes, his name is Luke Harper. Yes, we're in the Ridgeview Estates area. Please send someone immediately." She hung up and gave me a look of pure triumph, as if she had just won a battle. I folded my arms, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. "Karen," I said slowly, "you've just wasted the police's time. When they get here, they're going to see that everything I've done is completely legal. And when they ask why your kids are trespassing, you'll have some explaining to do." Her smirk faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. "We'll see. I'm sure the officers will be very interested in how you're turning a neighborhood lake into a zoo attraction." Before I could respond, her daughter Mia, maybe 10 years old, decided to wade into the shallows with a float ring. I took 2 steps forward. "Mia, get out of the water," I barked, my voice sharper than I intended. Karen spun around, snapping, "Don't yell at my kids, then control them." I shot back. "This isn't a joke. There are live animals in there. It's not a playground. Do you want to risk one of them getting nipped?" Susan, the brunette mom, laughed nervously. "You're exaggerating. Luke, I doubt whatever you put in there is dangerous." "Do you even know what a nurse shark is?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "No, they're not man-eaters, but they have powerful jaws. If one of them gets startled by a kid kicking around in the water, guess what happens? We're talking stitches and hospital bills. Are you willing to take that risk?" That finally made Mia stop. She looked at her mom, eyes wide, and climbed back onto the grass. Karen muttered something under her breath, but she didn't push her kids back into the water. I exhaled, trying to rein in my frustration. "Look, Karen, I've been more than patient with you. I've told you before, this lake is not public property. You don't get to just stroll in here whenever you feel like it." She tilted her head like she was the victim. "You're overreacting. Luke, it's just a lake. You can't keep kids away from water when it's 100 degrees out." "Yes, I can," I said flatly, "and I will." At that moment, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Karen's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Ah, there they are. Let's see what the law has to say about this." A few minutes later, a patrol car rolled up, dust kicking up from my gravel driveway. 2 officers stepped out, one younger and one older, both looking like they'd been called out for the dumbest complaint of the day. The older officer approached, hand resting on his belt. "Afternoon, folks. We got a call about some, sharks." Karen pounced. "Yes, officer, this man put sharks in the lake where our kids swim. It's outrageous. We're just trying to use the lake like we always have, and now it's unsafe." The officer raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" I handed him the folder I'd prepared weeks ago. Permits, documentation, the works. "Officer, my name's Luke Harper. I own this property, including the lake. I'm a retired wildlife consultant, and I'm running a fully permitted study with nurse sharks. They're harmless as long as you don't bother them. I've got everything here in writing." The younger cop flipped through the documents, nodding. "Everything seems in order here," he murmured to his partner. Karen's face went pale. "What? You can't be serious. Sharks in our lake." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, this isn't a community lake. According to these records, the lake is fully on Mr. Harper's property. He's within his rights to do what he's doing, as long as it's legal, and it is." Karen's jaw dropped. "You're taking his side." The older cop sighed. "Ma'am, I'm taking the side of the law. If you don't have permission to be on his property, you're trespassing. I suggest you gather your things and leave." Karen wasn't done, though. I could see the fury brewing in her eyes. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. This was about her pride. And Karen doesn't lose gracefully. Karen's lips tightened as if she'd swallowed something sour. The officer's words didn't sit well with her. She wasn't used to being told no, especially not in front of her crew. She puffed up her chest and planted her hands on her hips, like a general rallying her troops. "This isn't over," she snapped. "I pay HOA fees to maintain this area. That means I have a say in what happens around here, and I'm not going to let some backyard marine experiment put kids at risk. The older officer raised his hand, trying to keep the situation calm. "Ma'am, let me make this clear one more time. This lake is private property. The HOA fees you pay cover common areas, parks, trails, maybe some landscaping, but not this. This land is deeded to Mr. Harper." Do you understand? Karen's cheeks turned a deeper shade of red, and for a moment, I thought she might explode. Instead, she turned toward the younger cop, as if hoping for backup. "Officer, do you really think it's safe to have sharks in a lake? What if one of them escapes?" What if the young cop stifled a laugh? "Ma'am, nurse sharks aren't exactly the monsters you see in movies. They're bottom feeders, mostly harmless unless someone tries to grab them. And given that this is private property, it's not really any of our concern." That sent Karen over the edge. "So you're telling me you're just going to leave this man to play God with a lake in our neighborhood? What happens when one of those things bites a kid? Then you'll all be sorry." I stepped forward, holding my ground. "Karen, if you're so worried about safety, maybe you should start by keeping your kids off land that doesn't belong to you. I've been more than patient, but enough is enough. You're trespassing, and I have every right to ask you to leave." The officers nodded. "He's right." The older one said, "Ma'am, if you refuse to leave, you could be cited for trespassing. We don't want it to come to that. So please just pack up your things." Karen shot me a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. She turned to her kids. "Tyler, Mia, grab your towels. We're leaving. But don't think this is the end. Luke, you're going to regret this." When the HOA ladies finally stomped off, the officers lingered for a moment. "Sorry about the trouble," the younger cop said with a grin. "We get calls like this more often than you'd think. Some folks just like to stir the pot." "Tell me about it," I muttered. "Looks like you're all squared away," the older officer added. "But if they come back and cause issues, give us a call. You're well within your rights." I thanked them, and as they pulled out of my driveway, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and dread. Relief that the law was on my side, but dread because I knew Karen wouldn't let this go. Sure enough, by the time evening rolled around, I spotted Karen's SUV idling at the end of the street. She wasn't on my property, but she was close enough to keep an eye on me. Every so often, I'd see her on the phone, gesturing angrily. I decided to head down to the dock to check on the nurse sharks. The water was calm, golden with the setting sun. I leaned down, watching the faint ripples as the sharks moved lazily below the surface. They were doing great calm, healthy, and completely uninterested in anything but the lake bottom. As I stood there, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I turned and saw Karen marching toward me again. Her face was set like stone, her phone still clutched in her hand. "Luke," she said, her tone icy. "I just got off the phone with the HOA board. They agree this is unacceptable. We'll be filing a formal complaint against you." I chuckled. "Good luck with that. The HOA has no jurisdiction over my land, and you know it." She took a step closer. "Don't be so sure. I'll have the entire neighborhood on my side. You think people are going to feel safe living next to a guy who dumps sharks in a lake? Will make your life miserable until you get rid of them." I looked her straight in the eye. "Karen, you've already tried calling the cops, and it blew up in your face. Do you really want to go down this road?" She smirked. "Oh, you haven't seen anything yet. I'm just getting started." That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of bourbon, watching the moon rise over the lake. I knew Karen well enough to know she wouldn't back down. She'd rally the HOA, spread rumors, do whatever it took to try and force me out or embarrass me. But I also knew one thing: I wasn't going to let her win. By the next morning, Karen had already made her move. I woke up to a barrage of HOA emails in my inbox, all with subject lines like urgent safety concern and shark incident at Ridgeview Lake. She'd copied half the neighborhood, painting me as some kind of reckless lunatic. According to her version of events, I had stalked the lake with aggressive predators, endangering children and violating community safety. I poured myself a strong cup of coffee and shook my head, scrolling through the drama-filled chain of replies. Most people were just confused. A few were already siding with her, parroting the same nonsense about the lake being a shared resource. But others' neighbors who actually respected property lines were asking, "Isn't that Luke's private lake? That was my opening." I typed out a calm but firm response. attaching scanned copies of my land deed, permits, and a brief explanation of my wildlife project. I made sure to emphasize that nurse sharks were harmless bottom feeders and that all activity was approved by the county. I ended the email with one line: "The safety of my neighbors is always a priority, but so is my right to manage my own property without harassment. Please do not trespass on my land or spread false information." Within an hour, my phone started buzzing. Some neighbors called to apologize for the confusion. Others were just curious. "You really have sharks out there?" one guy asked. Half joking, I explained the project to anyone willing to listen. Most folks were actually fascinated once they understood it wasn't some wild stunt. But not Karen. She fired back another email, calling me irresponsible and demanding an emergency HOA meeting. She even hinted that the board might take legal action against me. That's when I decided it was time to take the gloves off. That afternoon, I went out to check my trail cameras. I'd set them up around the property for wildlife observation, but they'd also captured Karen's little invasion the day before, her kids splashing in the shallows, her ignoring my warnings, even her yelling into the phone at 911. With a grin, I downloaded the footage. This was exactly what I needed. By evening, word had spread. Karen had cornered a few neighbors in the cul-de-sac, ranting about killer sharks and negligent landowners. I could hear her voice all the way from my porch. I decided to put an end to the circus. I walked over, laptop under my arm, and found a small crowd gathered: Karen, Susan, a couple of dads from down the street, and even the HOA vice president, Greg. Well, Karen said as I approached. "Come to defend your Shark Tank, no," I said calmly. "Just here to show the truth." I opened the laptop and played the trail cam footage. The group fell silent as the video rolled Karen striding onto my land without permission, her kids running into the water, me calmly telling her to stop. Then the part where she scoffed at my warnings and called 911. When the clip ended, I looked around. This is what really happened. I didn't invite anyone here. I didn't endanger anyone. In fact, I tried to keep everyone safe. What you're hearing from Karen is a twisted version of the truth. Greg crossed his arms, clearly irritated. "Karen, is this accurate?" Karen's face turned a blotchy red. He's just making it look worse than it was. "We have the right to use that lake now." "You don't," I interrupted. "This lake has never been HOA property. It's on my deed, and I have the tax records to prove it. If you don't believe me, I'll print them out for you right now." Susan looked uncomfortable. "Karen, and maybe we should just let it go. I mean, if it's his property." Karen's jaw clenched, but she didn't have a comeback. For once, she was speechless. That night, I received a short, terse email from the HOA Vice President Luke. "We reviewed the property lines and your permits. You're fully within your rights. The HOA will not pursue any action. Sorry for the misunderstanding." I leaned back in my chair, smiling. I'd won the first round, but I knew Karen wasn't done, not yet. I thought the HOA's official acknowledgement would finally shut Karen down, but I should have known better. A woman like her doesn't quit when she's wrong, she doubles down. 2 days later, as I was tightening a bolt on my dock, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A line of 3 vehicles rolled up, each carrying someone from the HOA board. At the front, stepping out with a clipboard like she was running for office, was Karen. Behind her came Greg, the vice president, and a couple of board members I didn't know well, folks who usually avoided drama. They looked uneasy, which told me Karen had dragged them into this emergency inspection against their better judgment. "Luke," Greg said as he approached, "we need to talk about the lake." I crossed my arms. "What about it? I thought this was settled." Karen butted in. "It's not settled. Just because you have permits doesn't mean you can endanger our community. We have concerns, and we're here to evaluate what you've done." "Evaluate," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Karen, this isn't your playground. You don't get to waltz onto my land and evaluate anything." Greg held up a hand. "We're just here to make sure everything's safe. Some residents are still nervous. We figured it'd be better to come by, see the setup, and maybe ease some worries." I sighed. "Fine. You want to see it? Follow me." I led them down to the dock. The water was calm and clear, the late afternoon sun glinting off the surface. If you looked closely, you could see the faint shadows of the nurse sharks gliding lazily below. "There," I said, pointing to the water. "These are nurse sharks. Harmless as long as you don't mess with them. I have proper permits, and I'm monitoring them for a research project with 2 licensed marine biologists. Everything I'm doing is legal and safe." One of the board members, a woman named Linda, peered into the water. "They're smaller than I expected," she admitted. "They're juveniles," I explained, "and they'll be here for less than 2 weeks. Once the study's done, we'll move them back to a controlled environment." But Karen wasn't interested in facts. She was pacing the dock, arms crossed, scowling at me. "I still don't like it. You can call them harmless all you want, but if one of those things bites someone, the HOA could get sued. The HOA..." I laughed. "Karen, you've been told a dozen times this lake is not HOA property. The only one liable here is me, and I've got insurance and waivers for my project. You're barking up the wrong tree." She glared at me. "We'll see about that. I've already talked to our HOA attorney." "Good," I interrupted. "Then maybe he explained to you that you have zero authority here." Greg sighed, clearly tired of being caught in the middle. "Karen, Luke's right. The HOA's legal counsel reviewed everything. We don't have jurisdiction over his property. We're wasting our time arguing about this." Karen turned on him like a cornered cat. "You're supposed to be protecting this neighborhood. What happens when one of these things attacks a pet or a child?" I decided it was time to hit her with reality. I pulled out my phone and showed them the trail cam video again, this time focusing on Karen's kids trespassing and splashing around while she ignored my warnings. "You see that?" I said. "The only reason there's any risk is because you keep barging in here like this is your personal water park. I've put up signs. I've warned you. If you keep trespassing, I'll have no choice but to take legal action myself." The group went quiet. Linda, the other board member, shook her head. "Karen, I think we need to back off. This is getting out of hand." But Karen wasn't ready to back down. She gave me a cold smile. "Fine. Luke, you want to play hardball, you'll regret it. I'll make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows what kind of man you are." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "Go ahead. Karen, tell them. Show them the video while you're at it. See how well that works out for you." As the board members filed back into their vehicles, I could see the tension on their faces. Greg lingered for a moment. "Luke," he said quietly, "I'm sorry about all this. Most of us don't agree with Karen, but she's persistent. Just hang in there." "Okay," I nodded. "Don't worry, Greg, I'm not going anywhere." That night, I caught Karen's kids trying to sneak back to the lake. I spotted them from my porch and yelled for them to leave. They bolted like deer. It was clear Karen hadn't learned her lesson, and the battle was far from over. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hammering. At first, I thought one of my neighbors was doing some repair, but when I walked outside, my blood pressure shot through the roof. Karen and a couple of HOA volunteers were putting up a massive, hand-painted sign right near my driveway. It read in bold, sloppy letters, "Warning, dangerous sharks. Do not enter." The sign was planted halfway on my property. That was the last straw. I grabbed my phone and took a few photos. "Karen," I shouted, walking toward her, "get that junk off my land right now." She turned, smiling like she'd just won an award. "Oh, this is for the community's safety. Luke, we don't want anyone getting hurt because of your exotic pets." "They're not pets. They're part of a research project," I said sharply. "And this sign is trespassing. You've crossed the line for the last time." Karen crossed her arms. "Go ahead, call the cops. Let's see how they feel about a lake filled with sharks." "Funny you should say that," I replied, holding up my phone, "because I've already got video of you trespassing, harassing me, and lying to the entire HOA. How about I share this with everyone, maybe the sheriff's department, too?" Her smile wavered, but she didn't back down. "Do whatever you want. Luke, everyone's on my side. Nobody wants sharks here." "Oh, really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Then you won't mind if I invite the neighbors over tonight to see what's really going on." That evening, I sent out a quick email to the neighborhood. I kept it simple. "Curious about the shark problem Karen's been talking about? Stop by my place at 6 p.m. and see for yourself. I'll answer every question and show the truth. By 6. A dozen people had gathered on my lawn. Greg, Susan, a few skeptical neighbors, and even a couple of teenagers who looked like they'd come just for the spectacle. Karen was there too, arms folded, standing off to the side like a guard dog. I walked down to the dock and motioned for everyone to follow. The lake was calm, reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. "Take a look," I said. "These are nurse sharks, harmless creatures. They feed on small fish and shellfish. They're not dangerous unless you do something stupid like, say, swimming where you're not supposed to." The kids leaned over the dock, pointing excitedly as the shadows of the sharks moved gracefully through the water. One of the dads whistled. "They're actually kind of beautiful," he said. "Exactly," I replied. "This isn't about danger. It's about respecting wildlife and respecting private property." I turned to Karen, who looked like she was chewing nails. "Karen's been telling everyone this lake is HOA property. It's not. I've got the deeds and tax records to prove it. Would anyone like to see them?" Greg raised a hand. "I've already seen the documents." He's right. The lake is Luke's property, and the HOA has no control over it. There was a murmur among the crowd. Susan looked at Karen, frowning. "Wait, you told us the HOA owned it. Did you even check before starting all this?" Karen's face flushed red. I was just trying to keep everyone safe. He's the one bringing sharks here, Karen," Greg said, stepping forward. "You've caused enough trouble. Luke hasn't broken any rules. You owe him and all of us an apology." Karen sputtered. "Apologize for what he's now." "Karen," Greg said, his tone firm. For once, Karen didn't have a comeback. She turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath. The neighbors stayed a while, asking me questions about the research project. Some even offered to help with feeding schedules or just wanted to learn more. It felt like the tide had finally turned. People were starting to see Karen for who she really was. As the crowd left, Greg shook my hand. "Luke, you handled that well. If she keeps harassing you, let me know. The board's tired of her antics." "Thanks, Greg," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the moonlight ripple across the lake, I knew Karen wouldn't give up completely, but she'd lost her audience and her credibility. The days following our impromptu lake tour were blissfully quiet, at least by Karen's standards. No more yelling, no more kids splashing around uninvited, and certainly no more 911 calls. It was as if the neighborhood had finally realized that Karen wasn't the gatekeeper she pretended to be, but Karen wasn't about to fade into the background gracefully. A few mornings later, I found a formal letter stuffed in my mailbox, an official complaint she had filed with the HOA, demanding that I cease all dangerous wildlife activities or face fines. I laughed out loud. First, I knew the HOA had zero legal ground. Second, Greg had already told me the board was done humoring her theatrics. Still, I decided to deal with this once and for all. That afternoon, I drove down to the county office. Within an hour, I had copies of every permit, property map, and legal document that clearly outlined my rights. I even picked up a letter from the county wildlife department, confirming that my research was fully authorized and posed no danger to the public. When I got home, I compiled it all into one neat folder, adding the trail cam footage for good measure. It was time to put an end to Karen's reign of chaos. The following weekend, I invited Greg and the HOA board over for a quick sit-down at my property. To my surprise, they all showed up minus Karen, of course. "Thanks for coming," I began, handing Greg the folder. "I know you've been dealing with Karen's complaints, so I wanted to clear this up once and for all." Greg flipped through the documents, nodding. "This is solid. Luke, honestly, we're all tired of this nonsense. Karen's been making us look like fools." One of the board members, Linda, sighed. "She's been calling us nonstop, complaining about you, about the lake, about everything. At this point, we're considering removing her from the board." I raised an eyebrow. "You can do that." "Oh, absolutely," Linda said. "We can call for a special vote if the majority agrees she's creating unnecessary conflict." A slow smile crept across my face. "Let me guess you already have the votes." Greg grinned. "We do now." A few days later, I heard the news from a neighbor. Karen had been voted off the HOA board after a heated meeting that apparently ended with her storming out in tears. For the first time in years, the neighborhood could breathe again. But justice didn't stop there. I also learned that Karen received a citation from the local authorities for making false emergency calls, thanks to the body cam footage from the officers and my trail cam evidence. She had to pay a hefty fine and was warned that another incident could land her in serious legal trouble. The next time I saw Karen, she didn't have the same swagger. She was walking her dog along the far side of the street, avoiding eye contact like I was invisible. I didn't gloat. I just nodded politely as I passed. Deep down, I figured that was enough victory for one man. With Karen out of the way, I finally had peace to continue my research. The nurse sharks thrived in the lake, and the project wrapped up smoothly. I even held a small wildlife evening for the neighbors who were curious, complete with a barbecue, a Q&A session, and a little education about the animals they had once feared. The atmosphere was warm, even friendly. Susan, who had once backed Karen, pulled me aside and said, "Luke, I'm sorry for the way we all reacted. We should have trusted you from the start." I just smiled. "Don't worry about it. I get it, people fear what they don't understand. But maybe this whole thing taught us all something about respect and boundaries." That night, as I sat on my porch with the sound of crickets in the background and the lake shimmering under the stars, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I had won, but because justice had played out the way it should. Karen's antics had backfired. The HOA had seen the truth, and my lake, my sanctuary, was once again my own. Sometimes, life has a way of testing your patience, especially when you're faced with someone like Karen, who thrives on control and chaos. For me, this lake isn't just a piece of property, it's a part of who I am. I've poured years of work, money, and heart into turning it into something meaningful. When Karen tried to claim it as her own playground, it wasn't just about boundaries, it was about respect. Standing up to her wasn't easy. There were moments I wanted to throw in the towel and let her have her way, just to avoid the constant drama. But when you know you're in the right, you have to hold your ground. The look on her face when the truth finally came out, when even the HOA saw through her lies, that moment was worth every headache she caused. This whole ordeal reminded me that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet like a calm lake after a storm. Karen's noise eventually drowned in her own stubbornness, and all that remained was the truth. If you've enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a Karen in your life? Share your story in the comments below. And if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Together, we'll keep telling stories where justice finds its way home.